why people yo-yo diet and how to break the cycle once and for all, because I know you are sick and tired of being sick and tired. You lose the weight, you gain it back. Sometimes it comes back with a vengeance and it's frustrating and you're tired of it. So I want to help you get rid of this once and for all. Let me know if this sounds familiar. You're eating clean, you're feeling motivated, you're seeing progress, and all of a sudden out of nowhere, you go back to your old habits. It feels super confusing because part of you is saying, why am I doing this when I know better? If you've ever felt that way, you're not alone and you're certainly not broken. I just want to let you know that. But you're also not dealing with a food problem or a knowledge problem. You're dealing with a toxic habit loop that needs to be broken once and for all. And here's what most people don't understand. Information does not change behavior. If it did, everyone would already be in great shape because everyone knows what to do. Most people know what to do. Eat better, move more, control portions. But knowledge alone is not enough because behavior is not driven by information. Behavior is driven by identity and conditioning, the things we do on a daily basis. So let me explain. Every action you take is tied to a version of that thing that you believe about who you are, right? So even if you start doing the right things, if your identity has not changed, if the chip has not changed, you will eventually go back to what feels familiar, what you already know, because your brain is constantly trying to stay congruent with who you believe you are. This is why so many people live in cycles of they start, they stop, they restart, they fall off, they try again over and over again. It's not a lack of effort. It's not a lack of desire. Most people want to change. Most people want change really, really bad. It's a lack of identity transformation. And that's exactly what the EYB nutrition plan is structured to do, because we're not just trying to help you change what you eat. We're trying to change how you think, how you respond, and ultimately who you are becoming. Your brain is wired for the old you. Okay. Think of it that way, right? The things that served you before are no longer serving you now. You know this because otherwise you would have brought your goals to fruition a long time ago, but you're not there. Remember what we talked about in the last video? We talked about synaptic connections. Those synaptic connections are these roadways that we create in our mind, those mental roadways. Every time you repeat a behavior, you reinforce that pathway. So when someone says, I don't know why I keep going back, the answer is simple, because the road is still there. And not only is it still there, it's still the fastest, easiest road your brain knows. So the goal is not to try harder. The goal is to make the old road irrelevant and build a new one that becomes the default. Because here's the part most people miss. You can't build a new identity casually, right? It just doesn't happen by default. You can't build it halfway. You can't build it while constantly negotiating with your old habits. There has to be a period of intentional separation. This is why inside of the EYB plan, we create structure, we create boundaries, we create clarity, we create phase one, which is a great reset from all of those things, because those things create repetition, and repetition creates identity. When we do something over and over again, we start to identify with that thing. So you don't become disciplined by talking about discipline or by trying harder. You become disciplined by doing disciplined things consistently and over time. This is the piece that most people miss because people want instant gratification. Something powerful begins to happen. You stop forcing yourself to do the right thing and you start becoming the type of person who naturally does it. That automaticity kicks in where you don't have to exert a ton of energy to make things happen. And that, my friend, is freedom. Not when everything is easy, but when your default response has changed, right? Things are going to continue to be difficult. Temptations are going to continue to be there, but you now respond very differently. Scripture is very clear. Transformation does not happen from the outside in. It happens from the inside out. Romans chapter 12, verse 2 says, we are transformed by the renewing of our mind. And that renewal requires awareness, intentionality, diligence. Proverbs 25, very clear about introspection. It talks about introspection. The purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. So what are we doing here? We are drawing it out. We are not just modifying behavior. We are uncovering the root of the reasons why you go for the things you know you shouldn't go. This is not prayed away Christianity. This is not passive faith. This is walking out your prayers, praying and then walking them out. This is faith with discipline. This is where the rubber meets the road. So let me introduce you to this framework, which I think will be very, very helpful for you in this process. This is used by the United States Air Force, and it's called OODA loop. It applies perfectly to our life situations, but we're going to apply it to this situation here. So the O stands for observe. What's actually happening, right? These pilots need to know, need to be very aware of what's happening in the horizon, right? They're looking, they're seeing what the situation is. Very much like when we encounter a challenge, we need to understand, right? Beyond what our eyes are seeing, we need to apply wisdom, discernment, and all those things to understand and observe what is actually happening. This is your awareness phase. This is thinking about your thinking. This is what we call metacognition, the thinking about the thinking. Ask yourself, what time do my temptations show up, right? When you start asking questions, what time do I usually fall short from my commitments, right? Maybe you've never thought about this, but there's a pattern there, right? It's usually for most people after 7 p.m. because they're tired, their discipline muscle is wore out. Ask yourself the question, what do I say to myself before I go off track? How do you give yourself permission to eat the thing you said you weren't going to eat? Because even if you haven't thought about this, in nanoseconds, you're negotiating with yourself whether you should eat this or that. And if you go for it, you actually gave yourself permission to do that, whether you know that consciously or subconsciously. We need to understand, we need to bring that to the surface. What excuses do I use when I fall short, right? How do I excuse myself? What is the thought process when things get hard, when there's adversity in my life? How do I respond to that adversity? What emotions are present? Is it anger, fear, resentment, bitterness, procrastination? This is all part of the observation process, and it is super needed if we're going to find the root of the challenge, okay? The other O is for orient. What does this mean? We need to understand what the data actually means, right? What we've actually observed. What does this data mean? This is where most people fail because they don't do the work, right? You're probably thinking this now. You're like, this is a lot of work. And it's like, yeah, if you want to overcome the challenge, we're going to have to go up against some adversity, some difficulty. But if you press in, you're going to see amazing results. So you start asking the question, why do I respond this way? Why do I mitigate emotions with food? What belief is driving this particular action? What past experiences or hurts shaped this pattern? What pain am I trying to medicate with food? Yikes. It's a good question, right? If you struggle with food, 99% of the time is we are dealing with some kind of pain and we're finding comfort. We're trying to change our state through sugar and dopamine and all those things. This is where you stop reacting, right? You stop being a victim and you start understanding. Clarity is potential power, I believe. A lot of people say clarity is power. I believe it's potential power because it's not power until you actually activate it. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. The D is for decide. What are you going to do about the information that you now have? Right? Now you start to understand, hey, here's the challenge. What are you going to do about it is what D stands for, decide. Now we build a plan, not emotional, but intentional. Okay. So let's talk about the spiritual aspects of this. How do we tackle this from a spiritual perspective? First of all, we need to take emotional inventory. Okay. We need to understand, in that phase, what is the thing that is actually leading us to that action? We need to pray with specificity once we know specifically what those things are. Now we know what to pray about. We need to memorize scripture. We need to meditate on scripture so that we can refute some of this flawed thinking, because this is how we renew our mind. We need to practice gratitude. And I know this is fluffy and we hear this all the time. Oh, you need to make this gratitude list. But let me tell you, when you really, really start to focus on the things that are already working for you, the blessings that are already in your life, you put yourself in a very different place. You have a different disposition towards these things. And then, of course, we need to fast with purpose, right? Not just be hungry, but actually take some time, separate some time where we're not consuming nutrients, when we're humbling ourselves before God, when we're coming with a contrite heart and we're saying, Lord, I can't do this on my own. I need you to help me bring this to the surface, show it to me, and more importantly, help me heal. From a mental perspective, we need to set visual cues. These are things that we see, and when we see them, they remind us of what we're doing, the commitments that we have. We need to use reminders as alarms because we live in a very distracted world and there's a lot of stuff going on. And if we don't set alarms, it just won't happen. We need to define a mission and vision for our lives. I often say that we should perceive ourselves as a corporation versus an individual. That radically changes how you show up in life. Okay, we can talk more about that in another video because that's an amazing subject, but just take that for what it's worth. We need to decide our response. So instead of going into adversity and just being like, oh, it just hit me and I responded. We need to start to meditate on what that looks like. Hey, when I get tempted and I'm in the face of that particular thing, how am I going to respond? What's the healthy response to that adversity? And third, physical, right? We need to grocery shop with intention, right? We need to meal prep. We need to have food on deck. We need to communicate with our accountability coach, right? Let the coach know what's going on. Face the music. We need to create micro goals. We need something to look forward to. We need something to look back on, and we need someone to look up to. So the look up to is God. The look back is the experiences that have already shaped you. And the look forward to is the thing that's going to excite you to move forward. So we need to create those micro goals, right? We need to eliminate trigger foods. Get the devil out of the house. If there's stuff in your house tempting you and you think you're going to be able to discipline yourself through these things, think again. The A is for act. We need to act. And act means we need to execute. This is where discipline lives, not hesitation, not perfection, just movement. Remember the cheesy saying, motion creates emotion. We need to get things going. We can't just stay in theory, right? We need to become very practical about these things. Pragmatics is huge. If you just stay in thought, it's never going to happen, right? The hardest part, to be honest with you, when it comes to, for example, cardio or any activity that you're trying to get started, whether it's meal prep or cardio, let's say cardio, right? Let's talk about cardio, is putting on your sneakers. That's the most difficult part. Don't consult with your feelings. Don't ask yourself, do I want to do this? How do I feel about this? Just move. Live by convictions, not by feelings. If you're stuck, okay, it's not random. It's one of these. You're either not observing accurately, you're misinterpreting reality, you're delaying decisions, aka procrastination, or you're not executing consistently, or all of the above. So here's the framework once again, so that you can rehearse this in your mind and you can keep it simple, clear, and repeatable. Okay, this is exactly what we want out of every framework. We want it to be simple, we want it to be clear, and we want it to be repeatable. And so let's go through the ODA framework here. Okay, so observe is actually what is happening. We need to observe, right? The other O is for orient, right? We need to know what does this mean? We need to gather the data and we need to know what the data means. The D is for decide. What are we going to do with the data that we now have, right? And the A is for act, okay? We need to act. We need to execute. And then we need to do it again and again and again, right? We need to show up until the new roadway that we created, that new synaptic connection actually starts to stick and becomes who we are, right? Until all these things happen, it's not going to come together because you don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems and your identity. So the question is not, why do I keep messing up? Why do I keep yo-yo dieting even though I said I wasn't going to do that? I don't think that's a good question. I think the real question is, who am I becoming through what I repeatedly do, right? And more importantly, who do I want to? How do I want to live my life? How do I want to show up? If you start thinking in these ways, if you start applying these frameworks, if you realize that there is a solution, but we got to do the work and you're willing to do the work, my friend, I promise you will overcome this whole situation, this over obsession with food. And once and for all, you will start to move forward and you'll do that in a very consistent, powerful way. And that is my prayer for you. I hope you got something out of this video. More importantly, I hope you put it into action. If you listen to this, you watch it, and you don't put it into action, then you just wasted almost 15 minutes. Please don't do that. Put it into action. My name is JT Tapias with the Empty Your Bucket Nutrition Plan. And if you're considering putting all this stuff together, taking all the guesswork out of it, I'm going to leave a link down below so that we can connect on a no strings attached strategy call where I can show you how to implement this, what the possibilities are. If we're a good fit, we can work together. If not, you'll walk away with a ton of clarity. Talk to you guys soon. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Ciao, ciao.